Welcome everybody. Welcome to this workshop. Hopefully I will remain unmuted while I'm talking. It's great that everybody is here and it's lovely to see people introducing themselves in the chat. My name is Professor Valerie Anderson and I work at the University of Portsmouth, but actually today I've been honoured and privileged to work with, or will be working with, a number of colleagues from universities and experts across the field of the British Academy of Management. And our focus, I'm going to share my screen now so that you can actually see the title of the workshop. Our focus for this workshop, I hope you can see that, if somebody can wave at me to make sure it's the right screen, hooray, is on peer review skills and processes for conferences, particularly, of course, the BAM conference, but the skills that we discuss are generally applicable. Now, conferences, it seems to me, are the lifeblood of our academic life. They're the way that we are able to stay connected with our colleagues, and they're also the way that we are able to learn about cutting edge, leading scholarship, new ideas in our fields. And conference submissions and the peer review process that goes along with conference submissions are a fundamental part of conference success. So with that in mind, the aim of our workshop today is for us to have the opportunity to discuss the peer review process that we undertake, or we may undertake, with regard to a conference submission. And here I do want to make the point that the way that we might tackle the peer review for a conference submission might be distinctive, although similar, to the way that we might undertake the peer review process for a journal article submission. So very much we hope today that we can discuss and learn from each other the peer review skills that are helpful with the reviewing of conference submissions in order to provide constructive feedback that will be helpful to authors as they develop their thinking, their work, and indeed their confidence if they're a newer career submitter to present their work. Also, of course, as with all BAM workshops, we have the opportunity to learn from and to network, albeit online, with leading BAM scholars. Now, just as a conference requires a lot of time, a lot of commitment, and a lot of energy from very many people, so actually this workshop has been a little bit like a mini conference, because it is drawing on the expertise, the commitment, and the energy of a wide range of expert members of the BAM Peer Review College. And the names appear on this slide of many of the experts that will be contributing to this workshop. So a thank you in advance to them, but also, of course, a massive thank you to the BAM staff who have put in such a lot of work to help us with the technical and the logistical features of organising this workshop. As there are a lot of experts, my proposal is that we introduce ourselves as we go along, rather than doing introductions at the very beginning. So very briefly, here's an overview of how we expect the afternoon to go today. We will start in a moment, gratefully, with Professor Stephen Proctor, who will discuss some of the important issues, opportunities, and perhaps some of the challenges with undertaking peer review for conference submissions. But at 3:30, we'll be opening up some breakout rooms, and these will be organised following from the information that everybody provided when they registered for the workshop. So there's a breakout room focused on the reviewing of conceptual submissions, for example, quantitative submissions, mixed method submissions, and there are 2 breakout rooms because of the volume of registrations for qualitative submissions. That breakout session will last about 45 minutes. So it's an opportunity to discuss and share knowledge, experience, and ideas about let's say, the doing of reviewing. And with that in mind, there were some resources provided to all those who registered for the conference in advance. They are, we hope that they're helpful, but they're certainly not mandatory or compulsory. If you haven't even opened the files, you shouldn't be too concerned at this stage, but they may be useful as aids to the discussion in the breakout room processes. After the breakout rooms at 4:15 prompt, we will reconvene in the main room, and that will be the opportunity to share some of the learning and the insights, and perhaps start to articulate some of the principles of effective conference feedback at that final plenary session. And as I say, we will aim to end somewhere between 4:50 and 5 p.m. And I'm going to give a little apology now because I need to leave to catch a train at 5 to 5. So I might just disappear from view from the Zoom room at that point, slightly before the workshop finishes. So that's all I think I need to say by way of introduction. There are no fire alarms planned. There's no housekeeping notices to give. So I am now going to hand over to Stephen. I will, in the spirit of all sorts of COVID briefings, I'll be the next slide, please, person. But Stephen has very kindly offered to speak for about 20 minutes or so about the generic processes and the importance of peer review for a good, successful conference. So over to you, Stephen.
Okay, thanks very much, Valerie, and hello everybody. It's great to see so many people here for this workshop. I'm going to cover the first part of this and really focus on what is down as the second part of the title, which is more the processes, and then the breakout rooms. I think more will cover what the actual reviews might look like, the skills that you might need to develop in order to produce a good review. I'm Stephen Proctor. I'm at Newcastle University Business School, and I'm a fellow of the Peer Review College, and also have some experience working earlier with BAM as the SIG chair and the track chair organizer for HRN, which traditionally has been one of the biggest tracks at the conference. So I've got some experience looking at it from the point of view of the track chair, as well as the more general reviewing, the reviewing side of things. Okay, thanks, Valerie. If I could. So what I want to do is, just as Valerie suggested, to bring out some issues around reviewing in general. And for some of you, this will pick up on the very successful workshop that the group ran at the BAM conference last year, which covered more the general issues of review. So we'll see, we're concerned primarily with conference reviewing and BAM conference reviewing, but obviously we need to draw on some general considerations about reviewing, what makes a good review, and so on, that apply to other kinds of reviewing, or apply to all kinds of reviewing, which include reviewing for journals, reviewing grant proposals, and so on. I've already mentioned the organisation of the conference, which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, but the division of the conference into conference tracks, generally by subject area, very often based on the special interest groups, which I'm sure some of you are involved in. And that's important for us for this session because it does structure the way that the reviewing process takes place in BAM, and it does identify, especially the track chairs or the co-chairs for some of the for some of the bigger conferences as the key people in this. And we'll see, one of the things I just want to bring out is the idea of what we're looking at here is a social process. So it's partly a question of your relationships on a personal or social level with the track chairs. Now, I just want to say very briefly something general about process, about reviewing, sorry, because it is as Valerie said, it is a very important part of academic life, but at the same time, there are very powerful disincentives to taking part. And the prime one probably is the amount of time that it can take, especially if you're doing a good job of reviewing. There's also issues around lack of recognition, although I think some of those are being some of those issues are being addressed to a certain degree at the moment. So it's good to see so many people here who obviously see value in reviewing, and I would certainly recommend those people who are just embarking on an academic career or career in academic research to be involved in reviewing. It might seem a real pain at sometimes, and it can do, but I think it is an important part, just from the point of view of your own professional identity. But it also has tangible benefits as well that you can look at in terms of getting access to current, very current research, being able to keep up with things, because the process can take so long. It might be 2 or 3 years before any submitted paper actually appears anywhere. But if you're involved in the reviewing of that, then that can give you a kind of early access view. Plus, of course, it does mean that you are involved in some way in the development of research. And it's not just a question of the reviewer playing a passive role. They can, to some degree, help shape the paper, and in doing so, help shape the direction of the kind of areas that they are working in. Now, for conferences, it's some element of that. We are concerned ultimately with, generally with papers that will at some point be submitted to journal, to academic journals, and will at some point appear and will at some point contribute to the development of disciplines. But there are important particular aspects to conference reviewing as well, because it's not just a question of the individual papers. The important thing is really that you are contributing to the success of the conference track, to the success of the conference more generally, although obviously the success of the conference is to some degree the sum of the successes of the tracks. And it's easier sometimes to focus on the track as the key area or the key level at which you can make a contribution. Now, that has implications for reviewing. As I said, there are some general principles, and we'll cover some of these in the breakout sessions, that apply to all kinds of reviewing, about the kind of tone to take, about the kind of underlying principles upon which you might base your reviews. But for conferences, and for the BAM conference, which we're concerned with in particular, there are particular things. And the first one, and most obvious one, well, I say obvious, it should be obvious, but the key thing is that timeliness assumes enormous importance for these reviews. Because we are working, unlike with a journal, you're not working to a strict timetable, then we already have the dates for the conference, we know when that's going to take place, so everything has to be done with those in mind. So when we have the deadlines for the reviews of the papers submitted to the conference, then these are hard deadlines. Okay, I mean, it's increasingly common now for journals to offer you a little bit of flexibility, which I think is great in terms of deadlines. But for BAM and for other conferences as well, that flexibility simply isn't there. So that's something, first of all, to bear in mind. Some of you will already have received papers to review, I think. and I've got the and I've got the deadline. So you've got to be able to make sure that between now and then, which isn't very far away, you're able to do the review. But the other aspect of it is what I've called here is a kind of trade-off between quality and participation. And what I mean by that is the difference really, or one of the differences between reviewing for a conference and reviewing for a journal.
How are you expecting to get yours down to $35?
You said £100 plus going to be around $130.
That's a really weird thing. I saw Stephen looking a bit confused, and so did I. I think there's a rogue call somewhere in the Zoom. I'm wondering if our BAM colleagues could just check that out. Right. I would say, Stephen, hopefully all is good.
Yeah,
I don't know how we're going to get the dollars together either. I wish I did.
I don't know what happened there, but there's some very strange transactions going on. Anyway, I've called it a trade-off here, but I mean it's really to think of it from the point of view of the track chair and what they want from their track. Because on the one hand, they want as good a quality level of papers as possible, and certainly reviewers can make a very valuable contribution to increasing that. But at the same time, they are, other things being equal, looking to expand or looking to maintain the level of participation in the track. In other words, they don't want a high quality track if it's only going to be 2 or 3 people there. They want something which is good quality, but which is also involving of, especially of early career researchers. So they're doing it with this implicit, generally, trade-off in mind, but it does have implications for the way in which you might be reviewing the papers. The ultimate crunch point is sometimes that if a paper is rejected, it means that somebody is then unable to obtain the funding for the conference from their employing organisation and will be unable to attend the conference at all. Okay, that's not a signal to say, or it's not the implication is not that you should just accept everything, reject nothing, but it is to say you have to bear the consequences of your recommendations very much more in mind. Valerie, could you go on to the next one? With that in mind, I'd just like to touch briefly on the well, 2 things: the BAM review criteria, which I think participants in the workshop have already been sent, and after this, just say a little bit about the kind of decisions that are open to people. Now, some of you will have reviewed before for the BAM conference. Some of you won't, I don't think. But these are the review criteria, and the logic of having looking at these across the board is to, well, ensure consistency really across the conference when the conference is quite decentralized in its organization. So we've got something which ensures some degree of consistency between the different areas, but it's also to try to provide, again, thinking it from the point of view of the track chairs, from the point of view of the track chair, a shorthand way of their being able to deal with what might be a huge amount of, well, a large amount of submissions within a very constrained space of time. So you're asked to, well, 2 things. Maybe take these in reverse order. The first one is what you'll see at the bottom of the page there, which is asking for a written review of the paper. And the recommendation is that this is no more than or is around 1 page, which equates single space to, we'd say, about 500 words, something like that. And in addition to that, which is something you'll be covering more in the in the breakout sessions, the form that might take and what would be a useful review for the track chair in these circumstances. You're asked to assess the paper, assess each paper on a scale of 0 to 5 on those 5 things at the top of the slide there. And against each of those, you'll see in brackets at the end the weight that they are, the weight that they are given in the calculation of the final score for the paper, or your final score for the paper. So contribution to knowledge conceptually, contribution to knowledge in practice, methodology, research design, which is obviously not counted if the paper is more of a conceptual paper rather than based on empirical data. 20% for originality and so on, and 10% more on the quality of the presentation. So I don't want to go through those individually or in any great depth, but I think it's something to bear in mind in the sessions also subsequently, if and when you are reviewing the papers, just this is what you're judging the paper against, but also whether you feel those are those criteria for review might be developed in some way. And also the question of the weightings, is it useful to have the weightings? And if we do have weightings, are those weightings the most appropriate ones? But this is what you're asked to do. So yes, we would very much like you to do this when you are reviewing the papers, but also bear in mind the question of whether you can have some input into how those criteria are developed, because it is something that the BAM Review College has some input into, and it is something which is kept under review throughout the year. Just touching on there at the bottom as well, you'll be aware, or some people will be aware, that there's a distinction in the conference between the developmental papers and the full papers. So it's the same kinds of criteria apply, but they are applied in slightly different ways or in slightly different levels for the two kinds of paper. Okay, Valerie, I'll just go on to the final slide, which covers the review recommendations. So these, on the basis of what you see in each paper, on the basis of the criteria that you're working to, you will be asked to make a recommendation from this list. So again, these should follow from the criteria that you've been applying. So again, I won't go through them in any great depth. Only the middle one there is that there is some flexibility in the size of the streams. So people, we're not thinking about. Most people have a fair idea what the size of the stream is going to be, but on the basis of previous experience. But there isn't a fixed number of papers, to accept. The track chairs will have some discretion in the size of in their decisions and in the size of the stream that gives rise to. But again, it's worth thinking about not just what you should apply to individual papers, but whether these are the kind of recommendations that are, this is an appropriate list or an appropriate list from which to make a choice on papers submitted to the BAM conference. That's all I've got to say, really. I don't know, there's probably not time for questions. I hope those can come up in the breakout rooms. But I don't know if anybody does have any observations or quick questions that they want answering, because if not, I'll just hand back to Valerie.
I think there's plenty of points that we can bring together, and maybe I'll ask each group facilitator to speak for 4 or 5 minutes, and we can build up a nice picture. We are recording this part of the session, by the way. So if they're willing, Paul, Catherine, our quantitative super team, were there some points that arose that you think you'd like to share?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. Got a bit of an echo going on, but never mind. We talked about the value and how it can build your academic career, and the importance of it for one's academic discipline, that one reviews regularly for conferences and journals. And we talked.
Sorry, if anybody else is mute, then we will not see the background. Go ahead.
Sorry?
Carry on, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, we're getting terrible feedback then. It seems to be a bit better now. Yeah, so we talked about the importance of journal reviewing for building one's career, using things like publons.com to create a reviewer profile to enhance one's career. Then we moved on to talking about good and bad experiences that we had experienced as reviewers. So everybody in the group talked about the good points were receiving constructive feedback, receiving supportive feedback. The negative comments related to brief feedback, which was very destructive, not very formative. It did not allow for any positive commentary. So we talked about how to register to become a journal reviewer, and then we moved on to talk about how to construct an effective review and what to recognize, e.g. what constituted contribution to knowledge, for example, the importance of looking for the relevant structure within a paper, and all the elements associated with that. So we recognize that it wasn't just about executing a quantitative method effectively. There was a need to connect the findings and the contribution with the academic literature and identify how you were enhancing the knowledge, what you were learning from reading that paper. What was the contribution that was being achieved? Was it of the relevant level, for example? And then we talked about the sort of nuts and bolts of quantitative reviewing in terms of appropriate quantitative design, how you can construct a quantitative model, what to look for, were the variables that were being used justified, for example, was that argument presented within the literature part? Was there justification for the approach being used? Was it appropriately sophisticated in the way that it was being applied, etc. And then we talked about the ethical issues, about using ethical data, confidential elements associated with that, and I think that was just about it. Yeah, we also talked about the need for taking care and attention as a reviewer, using appropriate language, being constructive and positive, and knowing one's limits. So only review using an approach that you're familiar with and that you can confidently analyze. Okay.
Excellent. It sounds like it was a very productive discussion, Paul. Thank you. And certainly I resonate with the issues of, does this paper hang together? Do the pieces of it join up? And so on. Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. I'm wondering if now we might go to Maureen to reflect on the discussion with the mixed methods group.
Thank you, Valerie. Yes, happy to say a few things. I think many of the things that Paul's just said apply, so I won't repeat. I don't think I'll repeat everything. that's been said in terms of some of the general points that don't just apply to mixed methods. We reflected that it could be harder to review a weaker paper than a stronger one. So we were talking about how for a strong paper sometimes it's, yeah, that's great. Maybe I can point to some things for improvement, but basically I'm very positive. If you've got a weak paper, it in a way places a greater burden on the reviewer, I think, to think about what are the weaknesses in the paper, and therefore what's the constructive feedback that you can give. So it takes more time and effort, I think, to do a really good, strong review on a weak paper. However, we also commented that it was very rewarding. I know some of the track chairs see the same people perhaps come back the next year, and whether it's a doctoral student or an early career researcher or anyone, sometimes one can see the development and how somebody's research has moved on over a 12-month period. So that was one of the things that we were reflecting on. Another sort of practical tip that I think applies to all forms of research was that one of our participants was pointing out that it was really helpful to give references in a review if you feel able to do so. So, you're giving that piece of hopefully constructive feedback, but, illustrate it with, if you can, give a source, give the author a clue as to where they can go and find a paper, and perhaps they can then go and find other papers of their own based on that one. But it's something that I think is a really helpful tip there. We talked a bit about, we talked quite a lot about research design and the challenges of covering it, describing your research design within the constraints. Obviously a developmental paper at BAM is very short. A full paper is somewhat longer, but still not as long as a journal article. So we were talking about how, as reviewers, how we have to perhaps deal with the bare bones of a design and be a little sympathetic. If someone's only got 2,000 words, they can't spend 2,000 words explaining their multi-methods research design, for example. So a little bit of pragmatism there required. Another really interesting comment from an experienced reviewers was, it's surprising how many papers don't do the bit we'd all expect to see at the end of a journal article, which is talking about the limitations of the study and potentially future research directions at the end of the study. Again, it's difficult to pack it all in, perhaps in a short conference paper, but we were just saying that piece around limitations is really important, because it is that critical reflection from the author's part that, no piece of research is perfect, and we need to be reflecting as researchers on the weaknesses of our own study. And then just a few thoughts, particularly relating to mixed methods. I think we were talking about how, if you're aiming to do qual and quant within your paper, you need to explain it, you need to justify it, what the purpose of the different elements are, the priority, the sequence of them, how you're integrating them, importantly, so they don't come across as just two separate studies, but they're together for a purpose to achieve a particular research aim. And the barriers to that, in a sense, it's putting a very great demands on the author, right, to cover all of that and to do it all within the word limit, and those sorts of things. So, but that need, if you're going to do mixed methods, you need to justify it, and you need to discuss how you're integrating it and where the benefit comes in terms of the richer insights, for example. So I think I'll stop there. I think those were the main.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
Things.
Don't be too greedy, Maureen, because the people the group, the facilitators who haven't spoken yet might feel, oh, what will I have left to say? But what resonated with me particularly there was, and I have to remind myself, conference papers, when we review them, we have to recognize, even if they're a full paper, they are a work in progress. It's not that they will, as a result of the conference, we hope, go on to be submitted, further developed to the journal. So it is important to recognise, I think, that is what we're dealing with at that stage, and to act in that role as the peer reviewer as well, helping the author move their thinking forwards. Shall we go to Yehuda next for the conceptual group? Thank you, Maureen.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And before I go for feedback on my team, my group, I would like to indicate to everybody that this is an activity for the BAM Peer Review College, and I have to thank so much to everybody that participated, contribute, all the fellows, especially Valerie and Steve for leading it, and to the BAM staff for supporting us. So I hope you benefited from it, and thank you everybody for coming. Great participation. As for the actual session, for the review, yes, we spoke about the unique element of looking at conceptual paper, the challenges, because you cannot just say it is great method or not great or unaccepted method. It is more even about intuition or understanding what is new and why is it important. And I mentioned two papers, two references that they could be very useful. One of them useful for everybody, for any type of work, which is the famous paper, That's Interesting. So something is not only that it is new, that nobody did it before, but that it is interesting, relevant, contributing. This is one reference by Davis, 71. The other one is a lovely editorial commentary by AMR editors about the building blocks of conceptual papers. And I just put
You're muted, Yehuda.
Yes, so I just put them in the, thank you. I just put them in the discussion, in the chat, so people can have a look at them. The very famous 50 years old paper that is always refreshing, helping you to understand what is really important compared to what is just okay. And then if you really want to work on conceptual paper, yes, what you can do, what you should do, what you may follow. And yes, that I really enjoyed seeing a new generation of reviewers coming and happy to learn, and that we can help them because we need it. Without reviewing, the system will collapse, and this is a system where we all help each other and learn at the same time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Yehuda. Now, I'm conscious that Carol and Zoe might be thinking, oh, come on, let me have a go now, or, oh, I don't mind. So I'm going to, Zoe, bear with me. I was with Zoe, so I enjoyed the conversation that she led. But Carol, I'll come to you next.
Thanks, Valerie. I mean, quite a lot has been said already of what we talked about. But I think perhaps just to reinforce perhaps a little more than it's been said already, this needs to be very developmental, and our aim is to help people improve their papers and really always bear that in mind. So we talked about that quite a lot, and we looked at the qualitative reviews, and one of them was much more detailed than the other, but the detailed one, we talked about how it started in a very positive way. So it drew the author into almost accepting or feeling that the paper was valued and opening them up to then receiving some more developmental feedback at that point. So we thought that that whole kind of tone and language and being constructive was really important. We talked about offering development, suggestions, avenues for development, and that also being important. From a qualitative point of view, we talked about the fact that clearly there's a whole range of different approaches that can be taken. So it was about justification, making sure there's good rationale and justification, and then within the limits of a word count, as somebody else said, making sure that there was enough detail to have some degree of confidence in the rigor of the paper. I think, interestingly, Valerie, you started this session by saying that doing this helps you improve your own practice, and we talked quite a lot about, well, what does a contribution look like? What are you looking for, and what do you do? If you write, how do you flag your contribution? So we kind of intermix those quite a bit, and then we had a really interesting discussion at the end about how do you get useful feedback actually when you're presenting at the conference, and how rather than giving a standard kind of presentation, you might present your dilemmas and tensions and seek feedback specifically on those as you go, and to make ways of making sure that, as well as the written feedback, the conference feedback is also helpful. So I think those were probably some of the key things that we've not already touched on.
Thank you. No, that's very interesting, and that's a very good thought about practice of giving feedback at the conference as well. That's something that we very rarely focus our attention on, whether that's done in an effective way. Zoe, the last but definitely not the least.
Hi everyone. Just to really endorse what all the other facilitators have said, I think that everybody's touched on some really important issues. In our session, we had quite a few people who not only had not reviewed, but hadn't actually received any reviews. So we really talked about, the first thing we tried to talk about is actually how you prepare to do a review and how you get yourself in the right mental and physical space, just sort of the process of actually reviewing. People that haven't undertaken these tasks before, they're trying to sort of say, well, how long should it take? And we talked about different approaches to that. And we talked about, excuse me, sorry, my post-COVID cough is not going away. We talked about the difference between conference papers and journal papers. And we also spent quite a lot of time talking about the role of balance in providing feedback. So, in terms of the actual principles of providing feedback, how you can be specific and constructive, and also help people build up their confidence rather than actually feel intimidated by the process. So one last point on that was that actually we encourage people to be confident in their own reactions and responses to papers, in terms of the questions and queries that they had were legitimate, and that actually it's helpful to authors to raise these things, because it's the responsibility of us to respond as individuals to readers, using our own professional judgment. So thanks to everyone who attended a really worthwhile, enjoyable session. Thank you.
Yeah, I was part of that group. I certainly enjoyed it. So thank you to all the facilitators. And I think I'm going to hand over to Stephen and Yehuda for any final words in a minute. But the other thing that arose a little bit that I've noticed in some of the chat on the various groups is questions from less experienced BAM colleagues about how many reviews one might get, how long one should allow to do them, and so on. These are practical questions, I will say from my own experience. It takes longer when I'm newer, but it's not something ever that you can just rush off and rattle off quite a few. You need to give it sufficient time. Within the BAM conference setup, if you tick the little box that said you were prepared to review, the chances are you have already received 2 papers to review. If you didn't tick that box and you would now think, well, I wouldn't mind undertaking a review, then if you contact our BAM colleagues, they can put you in touch with the relevant conference track chair, because if they need a bit more support this year in the reviewing side, then it might be that they would contact you. No promises, because all the papers might already be out now for review, but it would be a shame if somebody felt confident enough as a result of this workshop to undertake a review. It perhaps will be possible to arrange that. And certainly as an author, I'd always be happy to get a third or an additional review on my paper, because every opinion does help. But I think in terms of the responsibility of, and the deadline, by the way, is the end of April, only offer if you can deliver on time. Stephen made that important point earlier. The other thing too, if you're a newer reviewer, is not to feel so burdened by the responsibility of it that you can become almost paralyzed, because the review process is really part of a dialogue, and that dialogue and discussion with the author is led by the track chair. So you are writing your review with the author in mind, but actually the review will be seen by the track chair, who may want to add some additional thoughts, and there will be at least one other review attached to that paper as well. So it's not as if everything rests on your shoulders, and so anything you're not sure about something, you can check with the track chair, because really the peer review process for a conference in particular is part of a dialogue. It's part of the way that we take our own work and the work of others. We enable it to move forward. So I would certainly encourage everybody to, if you haven't reviewed before and you feel that you're ready in your development, to take a little bit of confidence and have a go. And I certainly learned in my experience that undertaking some peer review processes for conferences gave me more confidence when I was subsequently invited to undertake peer review for journal articles by an editor. So it was a good learning experience for me, and so I commend it to others if you haven't yet done it. So at this point, I'm going to cease talking. I think I've said more than enough already. I'm going to invite Stephen, if he's got additional comments to make, to do so, and then also give the final word after that to Yehuda.
Okay, thanks Valerie, and thank you to all the participants this afternoon. I think from my perspective, I think the most important, not that any particular lessons to come out of it, but I think it raises questions about what we can do as a peer review college, which is becoming, fairly well established, I think, in a relatively short space of time. But this would seem to be one area in which we can try and have a little more influence on the direction and the quality of the conference. Because obviously, that from a BAM point of view, the conference is the main external facing activity that we have. And if we can get something in which, there's always a danger of over systemizing these kinds of things, but I think across the conference as a whole, and it is a while since I've been involved directly, but my impression is that this could form part of a way of generally improving the conference and getting it more externally recognized, externally admired. I don't know if Yehuda has any views on that.
Well, I fully agree, and I think that reviewing is one of the best learning exercises that we can have within the community. And we learn a lot. I still learn. I still benefit from it. And by giving to the community, you're receiving a lot in terms of your own development, in terms of your professionalism, not only as a social behavior, but in terms of improving your own professionalism, being able to judge work of others, which helps you later to judge your own work. And the more you review, the better you become, but you have to start sometime. And I think it is, as Valerie said, it is much better to start with a conference paper and conference reviewing, because what was that will happen? Okay, compared to if you destroy someone's work for a journal or promote someone's work that it doesn't worth it to be published in a top journal, this is not so good. In a conference, it is less critical, although it is still important, because if you let really poor paper being accepted, people will not benefit from the conference. If you reject paper with potential, it will have an impact on that person and on the people that could have benefited from it. And of course on BAM, because we want to develop and support our community. So these are some of those points that I can reaffirm. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a few minutes left. So I'm going to invite people who have what I would call pertinent questions to this workshop, not to the running of BAM generally or the conference, but pertinent questions to peer reviewing that we might not have addressed. If you'd like to put your question in the chat, that will just help us to manage the process. But if hopefully we have addressed many of the questions that have been raised through the very useful breakout process. So now is your opportunity, colleagues, if you have an additional question that can be answered this afternoon, and to place that question, and I'm just going to look for 2 or 3 minutes at that. But whilst people are having the opportunity to think, do I have a question and am I brave enough to put it in the chat, I will say a very big thank you on behalf of BAM again to the BAM staff for really managing the technical side of this workshop. I think it's one of the most challenging ones that we've asked them to do, with large numbers of delegates, which is brilliant, participants, and also a large number of breakout rooms, and of course to our breakout room facilitators as well. They're all, as with conference peer reviewing, it's all voluntary effort. These people stepped up and said, I'm happy to do this. And I'm sure that you would, like me, want to recognise how helpful that has been and to thank them on everybody's behalf. Now, I'm not seeing any questions. So I think with that in mind, if BAM colleagues, if we are content, we might call the workshop to a close. Yeah. Okay. Well, the BAM conference is going to be with us sooner than we know, which is very exciting. So thank you in anticipation for your peer review work if you are going to undertake it. Thank you and best wishes for your paper submissions. If you have submitted papers, that's also very exciting. And of course, we very much hope and look forward to meeting you, connecting with you, and hearing more about your research at the conference itself. So thank you very much, and enjoy, if you're in the UK, enjoy the sunny weather while it lasts. Bye for now.